grade 12s. Today we're going to be discussing some exam techniques for short stories, okay? What I've elected to do is one short story, and I'm going to explain to you how questions are asked and answered based on the elements of the short story. Okay, so let's just start with that one right now. Right, so what are the elements of a short story? What does that mean? What are the things that we can identify in a short story, okay, that makes up every little aspect of it? So it's divided into various things. Those are the elements. So the first thing, the plot. Okay, or not the first thing, these are in no particular order, by the way. So we have plot. And the plot is basically what happens in the story. But let me be very clear. It is not a retelling of the story. Okay? The events that are important and that drive the story, those events make up the plot. So you're going to have your introduction, you're going to have your rising action, your climax, your conclusion, and your denouement. That is your plot. It's made up of all 5 of those elements. So it is not ever a retelling of the story, okay? It's taking the important events out that drives the story, that allows the story to unfold. The next one is setting. And what is setting? When and where? Time and place. Okay, so your teacher has probably taught you about various short stories and said to you it's in the 19th century in a town called whatever, okay, Johannesburg. However, when we get to setting questions in this exam coming for your upcoming NSC exam, then setting is going to be a little bit different in terms of wanting you to give the context of the extract. So you need to place it into context, then you need to say it happens in the lounge after the argument. So you have to be specific in terms of when and where, okay, that particular event happens. Characters. What are the characters? They're basically just the people in the short story. Characterization, however, very interesting. It is how the characters behave and then also their interaction with the other characters in the story. Because remember, when people do something, okay, and when they interact with other people, then we are able to see who they are, okay? Then it tells us you are kind, you are smart, you are thoughtful, okay, or you are, it tells us something about the person. So in order for us to start picking up on the type of people in the stories, they need to do things and they need to interact with others. And that basically is what character and characterization is. And that needs to happen in order to drive the plot. In order for you to say, this happened, then that, and that. You have to have your characters doing stuff. Okay, themes. What are themes? Well, those are the universal messages. Once again, I appeal to you. Please don't ever use the word universal message. What that basically means is, it is something that all of us are able to relate to. Now, the story that I'm going to discuss with you later on to illustrate these things is called Next Door. Okay? It's about the little boy whose parents leave him at home to protect him from the world. So, that theme of innocence lost, when we get to it, that is an idea that we can all relate to. We all know there was a chance or a time in our lives where we were blissfully ignorant and naive, and then something happens and we realize, oh my word, you get racist people. Oh my word, you find people who are sexist. You find people who are unhappy and they take it out on you. You know, that idea of being able to relate to an experience regardless of how it is told to you. Okay, so, but you have gone through that experience and you felt that emotion. That is what the theme is all about. You should be able to say, I know exactly what that means. The idea of generation gap in the drama. Okay, you know what that's like. Even now, even though the context is different in terms of technology, for example. Your parents, you're on your phone too much. And you're thinking like, but that's what the phone's for. And your parents don't understand, but that's your life. That's where you live your life. That idea of the generation gap as a theme is something that you can latch onto. Okay, and you're going to notice that throughout my presentation, I'm going to be referring to all 3 papers because I firmly believe that if you're going to do well in any of them, then an integration of the 3 papers is very, very important. If you are able to answer paper 2 well in terms of facial expressions, body language, punctuation, and those sorts of things, then you can do visual literacy very well also, okay? So it is integrated. My teaching is integrated and is going to teach you the skills to be able to do the various questions in any of the papers. Right. The next one, narrator. Is the narrator first or third person? So is the narrator standing outside looking in, or is he one of the characters and telling us the story? Because if it's the narrator that's telling us the story, remember, then we're getting it from their perspective. Okay? But if it is third person, then it's outside and they're giving us, we get to see more people's perspectives and behavior based on what the third person narrator is telling us and sharing with us. Conflict. What's that? That's the turning point. That's where things happen and boom! Okay, now things are going to change. Okay, that normally happens when you reach your climax in terms of your plot. Okay, then the suitability of the title. Does the title of the story speak to what happens in the story? Okay, can you see how these two things are linked? The name of the story and the events that unfold. Remember, I spoke to you about next door. We are going to speak about that when we get to the story, the suitability of that title. Right. Exam skills. These are very basic exam skills, but I will, in a next presentation, explain in detail in terms of how to answer the questions. So what do? You get a question. Take a highlighter into your venue, guys. You're going to get to a question, okay? When I say deconstruct that question, all I'm saying is look for the instructional verb. What must you do? Must you name? Must you compare? Must you list? What must you do? What is the verb? What is the action that you must do? That is your instructional verb, okay? Then you must identify your content. So, if your question says, look at line 9, then that is your limitation. You must go to limitation, okay, to those 3 things. You need to first identify the verb. Then you need to know the content. What is the question about? Then you need to know the limitation. Where must you go and look for the answer? So, if the question says go to line 9, then that is your limitation. You must take that into consideration. Your content will then be found there. So, what must you do? You must list. That's your instructional verb. Or you must compare. Compare the behavior of the 2 characters in lines 9 to 11. Compare, instructional verb. Content, the behavior of the 2 characters, where your limitation, lines 9 to 11. You've identified all 3. Instructional verb is compare, content, the behavior of the characters, and your limitation, lines 9 to 11. And there you have effectively taken the question apart, because that's all that means, to deconstruct, take it apart in its smallest bits. Now you have to write a response to that. Now how do you do that? How do you write the response to that? You make a point, okay? Then you find evidence from the text, okay? Find an evidence from the text, and you need to have an example. Now what does that mean? So if we are talking about, for example, in the story that we are going to do, we are talking about Paul's mother, okay? And the question is she overprotective? Right? Now you must answer. Respond to the question, point, evidence, explanation. Is Paul's mother overprotective? What are you saying? Yes, Paul's mother is overprotective. What is your evidence from the text? She leaves a list of phone numbers. She doesn't want to leave him home alone. She calls him my baby. And your explanation? All of those things that she does shows us that she is sheltering him so much from the world and not giving him an opportunity to grow up. So yes, she's overprotective. Do you understand what you must do? You need to say, that's your point. Then you take evidence to support it from the text. And then you explain why that evidence supports that point. Okay? And then you link it all together. I hope that makes sense to you. Makes sense to me. Okay. So the next one. So you have done 8 short stories, okay? You are supposed to have done 8 short stories. If you don't know what they are, then yeah, I've given them to you. Class, Ruby, Village people, I'm not going to go through. This is just a list for you to know. I must read all of these to be prepared for the NSC exam, right? So, themes and characters. How are the characters linked to a theme through their actions? What does that mean? Now remember we spoke about characterization and then themes as the idea of a universal message. But now the only way that a theme emerges is when people do things, okay? So if we're looking at the idea of the short story, the themes and the characters, and the next short story, Next Door, then the idea of Paul being forced to become mature before the time happens when he's left home alone by his parents and then exposed to the neighbor's argument. Okay, so how are the characters linked to a theme? Through their actions. Paul then goes out and he interacts with these people, and that is how Innocence Lost, that theme happens. Okay, the question again, how are the characters linked to a theme through their actions? What do they do that links them to that particular theme? Okay, why am I asking you that particular question? It seems very random, but it's not, because theme and characters, okay, those two things will allow you to understand the dynamics of the story very well. Okay, so later on you're going to get questions about figures of speech, you're going to get things about tone, you're going to get setting. But if you know the characters, how they behave alone and with other people, and you understand the theme, then you're also able, grade 12, to give an answer to the open-ended and the higher order questions, because the higher order questions will ask you about theme and character. 3 marks, 3 marks. So if you are able to understand and do this, understand how the characters and their actions link to the theme, then there are 6 marks waiting for you of the higher order questions to score. Okay? Right, so let's now look at the actual story and then take those elements and work them together to understand how you are supposed to now answer these questions and what they're going to ask you. So the elements of the short story we've already done. So this one is for Next Door, okay? So the title of Next Door, it names the setting. So what does that mean? The title tells us where it happens. It happens next door. Then it focuses on the violent drama that Paul hears happening next door with the neighbors. So I don't know if you remember the story. Let me just maybe quickly give you a rundown. So Paul's 8 years old and his parents are saying like, we want to watch this movie. But I don't think, the mother says, I don't think that Paul can watch this movie, man. But I also don't think he can stay home alone. And his dad goes like, listen, you need to decide. The child's growing up. Stop calling. And she's like, she calls him my baby. And, you know, she just sort of makes him into this little person without any sort of opportunity to grow. You know, she wants to baby him forever. And his father's like, no, you need to let this child go. You need to let him grow up. So what she does is she says, okay, cool. He can stay home because the movie is inappropriate. You need to ask yourself, what type of movie would be inappropriate? What type of movie would his parents not want him to see? So his dad goes like, his mom says, okay, he can stay at home. And she leaves like a list of phone numbers and, you know, she tells him what to do and who to call should anything happen, and he must stay at home, and he's going to sit on his, with his telescope, and he's now, you know, going to, microscope, sorry, he's going to do all these things. Right. Then he hears noises. Now, the divider between the house, because the houses are attached to each other, the walls are quite thin. So he hears noises and arguments coming from next door, and he's like, oh wow, what is happening? And he can actually hear what they're saying. But while this is happening, there's a guy on the radio called All Night Sam, and he plays dedications. So the boy decides, Paul decides, he's going to save the marriage of the neighbors, and he sends a dedication. Or he asks that a dedication be sent. But the lady next door is not the wife. So this is the neighbor and his girlfriend who are fighting. And then he hears a shot. And the girlfriend comes running out and she tries to bribe him, but she also threatens him. And then Mrs. Hager comes back eventually to her husband, the police are there, and then eventually Paul's parents come home. Unaware of what had just happened. So that's basically, in a nutshell, next door. Please go and read the story. I didn't tell you everything, right? So now, the title suggests that, look, next door is next door, right? It's like by your neighbors. But the title here, it suggests that the events that happen next door, close to you, not in your personal space, but and next door can refer to the place around you, the space around you. It can affect lives at home as well. It can affect you. Basically, let's take it a step further. What happens around you can affect you personally. Okay? So can you understand how multifaceted this title is? First of all, it tells us where it takes place. Okay? Then it focuses on what is happening there, the violence that is happening next door, that Paul can hear. And then also the fact that next door doesn't have to remain where it is. Next door can affect you where you are as well. So it's a very good title, and it's not just literal. Okay? It also tells you a story. There's a figurative aspect to it. Right. The setting. It's set in the USA in a semi-detached house in the 1950s. That's a very generic setting in terms of when and where the story happens. But when you write your exam, the question is not going to be about the generic setting. It is going to be about the setting of the extract. Okay? So for example, at the end, Paul's mother comes home and she speaks to him about what she found in his pocket. What is the setting of that? The setting would be when the parents have returned from the movies, where in Paul's bedroom. Okay? That is how you would answer the question on setting in your NSC paper 2 question paper. Right. The dividing wall is paper thin, so it tells us now that because the wall, why do they tell us that? We need to understand that because the wall is thin, Paul is basically privy to everything that is happening next door. He just can't see, but he can hear. And you know that when one of your senses are dulled, the other one is sharpened. So because he can't see what's happening, every sound that he hears from next door is more pronounced. Paul is home alone and is able to hear the neighbors fighting. I should maybe have highlighted the word hear because he can't see it, which means that he is now hearing everything that much more distinctly than he would have if he had seen it. Because you know, with our senses, we tend to focus on one thing. So if we hear something, then we're like, wait, let me listen. Okay, then you're not looking. Okay, but when you are looking, you are not necessarily listening. Okay, so his sense of hearing was sharpened because he couldn't see what was happening. Right, the plot. Now, remember I said to you the plot is not a retelling of the story. The plot here, in this particular story, this is just to explain to you what I mean by introduction, rising action, climax. Sometimes there's not falling action, like in this story there's just a conclusion. So, introduction. The Leonards are going to see a movie that is unsuitable for a young child. Okay, that's where the story starts. What is the rising action? They go, and now Paul's home alone, and Paul now hears the argument, and he tries to stop the fight by phoning the radio station, and that only makes matters worse, guys. Please look at the fact that I've made this into 3 little parts of one sentence. How many pages in the actual short story did you have to read to be able to see the rising action as I've put it here? He's home alone, he hears the fight, he tries to stop it, he calls the radio station, but he makes it work. 5 sentences or 5 different little points to tell you what has happened, and that is the rising action. What is the climax? He hears 3 shots fired. And now what is he thinking? Oh, responsible for a murder. Because now he thinks that Mr. Hager has died. Okay? And in the conclusion, he opens the door. Okay? And Charlotte, which is now the girlfriend, she comes running out. And I said murderer here in italics because we now know later on we find out that he hasn't died. He tries to bribe Paul. The police arrive and they find the victim unharmed, which is now the neighbor, Paul's neighbor, and he succeeds in getting Mr. and Mrs. Hager back together. Because remember, Mrs. Hager pitches up there thinking that the dedication was meant for her. Okay? So once again, there's that thing happening on 2 levels. When the dedication goes out, Charlotte hears it and she almost wants to shoot Mr. Hager. Mrs. Hager hears it and she runs back home to be with her husband because she thinks the most romantic thing ever. So Paul's message, his dedication, has done two things. It's broken up the relationship of Hager and his girlfriend, but it has inadvertently saved his marriage. Remember, that was why he sent the message, to save the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Hager, because he thought that was them. So he in a way, or without really realizing it, he does save their marriage, because Charlotte leaves and Mrs. Hager comes back. Okay. So that is your plot, okay? It is not just this happened, then this happened, then these things here all lead to the next, okay? And it allows the entire plot to develop and the story to happen, and people are doing things. Remember, look here, the Leonards are going to see it. Those are characters. Paul is home, here's a violence. So Paul, and what is happening to him? What does he then do? Well, who does he interact with? With the radio station host, and he makes, he sends that request. He hears 3 shots, that's him. He now thinks, oh, I'm responsible for a murder. So what does that tell us about the character of Paul? You know, that he didn't fire the weapon, but he feels responsible for the murder. So that tells you how this child is actually very, he has a deep sense of what is right and wrong, because he feels if he hadn't interfered, the neighbor, Mr. Hager, would still have been alive, because he thought he killed him. But he didn't touch the weapon, but yet he accepts that responsibility. So what does that tell us about the character of Paul? I'm not going to tell you, I'm just asking you a rhetorical question to make you think. Right. Who are the characters in this story? Paul, Mrs. Leonard, his mum, Mr. Leonard, his dad, Mr. Hager, Mrs. Hager, and Charlotte. Now, we find round characters and flat characters. The round ones are the ones who we know more about because of what is said about them. Okay? So, all we know about Mrs. Hager is that she babies Paul. Sorry, not Mrs. Hager, Mrs. Leonard. She babies Paul. Mr. Leonard wants Paul to be a big boy. Okay? Mr. Hager, cheating on his wife. Mrs. Hager wants to be back with her husband. Charlotte wants to bribe a 10-year-old, 9-year-old. And she's like, yeah, and she also threatens him. So, we don't know much more about these people. Okay? So they are flat characters, because we just know them from one dimension. Paul, however, we know that he's been exposed to all these things and he doesn't tell his parents about it. So Paul is more of a round character. He's a brave little boy. He has been exposed to this thing. He's lost his innocence. But he doesn't tell his mum and his dad what's happened, because maybe he senses that they're not ready to know this. They would probably blame themselves. So Paul is quite a complex little boy. Okay? And we know this because of the things that we've read about him. We haven't read that many things about the other characters, so that is why we can't say that they are round. Right, let's move on. So, Paul's mother, okay, she treats him like a baby. What else can I say? Nothing, because that's what we've read. So, is she round or flat? You decide. She doesn't feel the movie is age appropriate. She's overprotective. She makes a list of emergency numbers. She locks the doors and the windows. What does that tell us about her? It all tells us that she is overprotective. The next one. His father thinks Paul would not be harmed. So his father's like, the child needs to grow up. Okay? If we go to the next one. Characterization. Now, Paul. What do we know about Paul? He's forced into premature development. How? Because he sees that, he hears that, he phones, Charlotte comes running out, Mrs. Hager. This child has just witnessed something that no child should see. That probably no adult, not many adults are going to see. Okay? He's just seen Mr. Hager, or heard Mr. Hager fight with his girlfriend. He's heard the gunshot. He's been threatened and bribed by Charlotte. He sees Mrs. Hager come back and he's thinking, holy ha, look at all this stuff. And the police question him as well. Can you imagine? And he doesn't tell his mommy. He has a soft, sleepy, radiant sweetness. So now you ask yourself, has he lost his innocence? You'd have to answer that based on the text. Has he lost it? I don't know. I think he has a little bit, because he didn't tell his mother what happened. He cares about others and he feels the need to fight, to stop the fight next door. He has to cope with a situation that is beyond his years. But he doesn't tell his mother. So, maybe a little bit of innocence lost there. He's still soft and sleepy and radiant and sweet and whatever, but there's now something being added to him because of the experience. Right. These are the themes. What are themes? The characters, how they interact with each other, and what that tells us is happening, okay? And how we are able to link to that experience. That is the theme. What are the themes? The difference between adults and children's perceptions. We all know kids see things one way and adults another. Coming of age. You know what coming of age is? Generally, when you're 21, then you have this, or 18 in certain cultures, then you are considered a man or an adult or a woman, okay? That's what coming of age means. Paul's coming of age was at a very young age through an experience, okay, an adult experience that he was exposed to through no fault of his own. And then innocence lost. He has lost his innocence, okay, because he saw this and he wasn't supposed to. And how funny, that is so ironic, because what were his parents trying to protect him from? Losing his innocence and being exposed to the adult world. And what happens? He's exposed to it grossly by Mr. Hager, Charlotte, and Mrs. Hager's whole debacle and the shooting. The suspected murder. Die arme kind. It is really very unfair. Then the guilt of parents. Like his mom feeling, but I want to go out, but like Paul can't go. What should I do? You know, like we don't always know how to manage the guilt. The parents, they don't always know how to manage the guilt, but they do feel guilty. These are his planned activities. He was going to microscope, look at the sugar and the hair and the pepper and whatever. And he tried to do that, but was interrupted by Mr. Hager and Charlotte's nonsense from next door. Okay. Irony. I just spoke about it now. They let him stay home. Why? Because the movie was too adult for him. It was too unsuitable for children. Because, why? Possibly violence, swearing, sex, fear, scary, horror movie. So those could be any of the reasons why they chose to keep him home. Was he not, in fact, exposed to all of those things? Violence, the gunshot, swearing, the fight, sex, the fact that they were having this affair, fear, scary, the fact that the police questioned him. So all the things that his parents were trying to protect him from that may have happened in the movie, in fact, happened at home. What does that also tell you? That you can't really plan. You can plan just so far, but you have to be prepared for the fact that your plan is not always going to go according to the way you want it to go. Because his parents were trying to keep him safe. They had no idea that in the safety of his house, he was being exposed to all the things they wanted to hide from him. So again, that idea of next door affecting you, where you are, comes to bear in this bit of irony. Guys, irony is always 2 or 0. Why is it ironic that Paul's parents left him home? They tried to keep him safe, but he was unsafe because of what happened at the neighbors. Irony, 2 or 0. Then we've got, I love this irony thing because I want you to get the 2 marks. Paul was exposed to the things that his parents were trying to hide him from, okay? Violence. Shots were fired. Swearing, the couple fought. I just said this, I didn't even know, Sex, the infidelity, the man's wife, he has left him, his lover was at his home, and then frightening. The boy thought that Hina caused the death or the murder of Mr. Hager. So all the stuff that they thought to keep him safe from. Not at all. Okay. Right. So there is one more slide. But I'm not going to go there now because I want to just first discuss a little bit about the paper, okay? So you are going to get different types of questions, okay? And this and the drama go together, right? So the types of questions are going to be the same. You're going to have mix and match. Now, when you have mix and match, and these are just exam tips, so please listen. I don't have slides to the effect. I just need you to listen to me. Mix and match basically means that you need to know the content. Now, 8 short stories, guys. Let's just go back to this quickly, to the elements. Look at these. The elements of the short story. How many short stories are there? There are 8, which means you need to know 8 titles, 8 settings, okay? And then you need to know the settings of the extracts. You need to know 8 different plots, 8 sets of characters, 8 themes, and 8 narrators. You need to know. And then you need to know, is this title suitable for that particular story, which means you need to know what happens in the story. So as much as it is 17 marks and 18 marks, which gives you 35, you can be asked you will be asked 2 out of an entire 8 short stories. So you need to know all of this for all the short stories. Why? Mix and match. Those are the first 4. Those are the names that you don't take much notice of. Okay? You focus on the main characters. The mix and match questions are not going to focus on that. They're going to focus on the things that are on the periphery. Okay, so you must know that. You must be able to match characters to their behavior. So characterization, you must be able to match that. You must be able to compare characters to one another. Okay, that's another way that in which you will be tested. You need to be able to answer an open-ended question. Please remember, any question where your opinion is requested needs to be grounded in the text. You don't say I. No, it's not about what you think. It is about your opinion that is grounded in the text. I love the question about Paul's mother and her being overprotective. Just look at Paul's mother. Treats Paul as though he is a baby. So if they ask you the question, or they make a statement, Paul's mother is overprotective. Discuss your opinion. Now they are not saying, what do you think? They are saying, what do you think based on what she does in the story? So in the story, she treats him like a baby. She doesn't feel the movie is age appropriate. She's overprotective, makes a list of emergency numbers, locks the doors and the windows, asks Paul, do you know how to make phone calls? Remember, statement, Paul's mother is overprotective. Discuss your view. If you say yes, then you're going to say, because she did the following things. If you are going to say no, then you're going to say, she treats him like a baby because he's 9 years old. Okay? And she knows that the movie isn't age appropriate. What makes her think that a 9-year-old child is able to stay home alone, regardless of all the phone numbers and whatever? So no, she's not overprotective. In fact, she's negligent because you don't leave a child of that age home alone. Now, see what I did there? Just because this is said about his mother doesn't mean she is overprotective. But it can mean that. So you need to learn to distinguish how you are going to interpret what happens. And then when you figure that out, you need to give evidence for your interpretation. It might be the same evidence, but how you see it. She treated him like a baby. Why would you leave a baby home alone? Are you with me? Then it means that she's not a good mother. Okay, so that was just some of the exam skills that I felt is needed for this paper. What I have done, and this is the last slide, is I've given you a resource for the short stories where all of these things will be covered. The short story book is called Changes because in each of the short stories, something changes. Chip of glass ruby, they make money. Next door, he loses his innocence. Village people, you find beautiful people that care about each other as well. The fur coat, you know, we discover new things about Molly. Transforming moments, the girl becomes Imbongi, praise poet. So the name of this is Changes. When you read these stories, guys, go and try and identify what the changes are, how they occur, and how the characters are part of that change. Okay, so this is the resource I'd like you to use if you want to. Thank you so much for joining me. I trust that the lesson will be helpful in terms of answering your paper 2, question 5 for the short stories. I wish you all the best and trust that you will do well. Thank you very much.